Hello students, my name is Abhishek Sudhir. I am an assistant professor at the Jindal Global Law School. Welcome to the UGC's EPG Pathshala project. We're dealing with paper number 4, Civil and Political Rights, and we'll be looking at module number 22, Principles on the Treatment of Prisoners. Right? In international law, prisoners' rights can be found in a number of treaties and instruments. Most of them came into force post the World Wars. The two world wars had a profound impact on contemporary international law, as a widespread denial of civil and political rights and liberties of people on grounds of religion, race, sex, etc. The systematic use of violence included murders, slavery, genocides, rapes, confiscation of properties, etc. The decades following the World War saw radical changes in all areas of international law, and prisoners' rights are no exception. Today, there are numerous international treaties and instruments which provide the codes by which prisoners should be treated. This module will deal with some of these codes and will also enumerate some of the principles contained in these international instruments. I will initially give you a list of the international instruments, and then I will give you a summary of all the principles enunciated in these international instruments. What are the learning outcomes of this module? First, to give the students an overview of the different international and regional declarations, conventions and charters guaranteeing the right against torture. And second, by the end of the module, students will have an understanding of international human rights law on the right against torture. So what are the international instruments dealing with the rights of prisoners, right? Well, you have the basic principles for treatment of prisoners passed in 1990 by the General Assembly of the United Nations. You also have the body of principles for the protection of all persons under any form of detention or imprisonment, also passed by the General Assembly in 1988. You have a code of conduct for law enforcement officials passed by General Assembly. You have a convention against torture, right? You have a convention against torture. You also have the Geneva Convention governing prisoners of war, right? Again, a product of the World Wars. And you have the other convention against cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment in 1984, right? So you have Convention against torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment 1984, which entered into force in 1987, right? So then you have the European prison rules, essentially, right? And you have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which also governs under Articles 7 and 10 the principles on treatment of prisoners, right? So you also have principles of medical ethics that are relevant to the role of health personnel, particularly physicians, in the protection of prisoners and detainees against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, essentially, right? And you have some standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. So all of these are international instruments. I've just rattled off a list. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through some of the principles that are enumerated, right? What are some of these principles? First, all prisoners shall be treated with respect due to their inherent dignity and value as human beings, right? That principle essentially is trying to say that just because they're criminals, as you know, Justice Krishna Iyer has also said in this country, right? Prisoners, convicted criminals have the same rights as free men. Okay. Also, there shall be no discrimination against prisoners on the ground of race, color, sex, language, religion. Forget discriminating against them as prisoners. Even there, you cannot have discrimination against race, color, language, or sex, essentially. Okay, property, birth, or other status. Right now, these principles also state that it is desirable to respect the religious beliefs and cultural precepts, right, of the group to which prisoners belong, whenever the local conditions so require, right? So essentially, if one of the prisoners believe in the Islamic faith, it's a time of Ramzan, right? They are devout Muslims. They'd like to pray every day. You must make reasonable arrangements for them to pray. Right now, the responsibility of prisons, right, for the custody of prisoners and for the protection of society against crime shall be discharged keeping with the state's other social objectives and its fundamental responsibilities for promoting the well-being and development of all members of society. Okay, so essentially that principle says that you must take into account the goals of the society, right? And when you consign somebody to prison and deprive them of their liberty for a long period of time, you must essentially sort of take into account, essentially take into account the social objectives and fundamental responsibilities for promoting the well-being and development of all members of society. Okay, so now, except for certain limitations, all prisoners shall retain human rights and fundamental freedoms set out in the UDHR. So something like the right to vote, prisoners don't have the right to vote. That is permissible. Why is that? Because it's necessitated by the fact of incarceration, right? Essentially, you give up your right to vote if you're convicted. Okay, and there is a movement in many countries, right, to give prisoners the right to vote. right? All prisoners shall have the right to take part in cultural activities and education aimed at the full development of the human personality. So you have this basically, right? You have access to education, especially in our country, right? Being in prison, you can enroll yourself in sort of long distance learning courses, right? Education is so important, right? Education, again, is at the core of Reformation, right? The reformative theory, which we've covered in the previous module. Okay, now, there must also be efforts to address the abolition of solitary confinement as a punishment, essentially, right? So what is solitary confinement? All of you who watch these American movies will see that if there is a fight in the prison, if you initiate something, right, or you're involved in a fight, they will confine you, right, in solitary, right? They say we put you in solitary, right? It is brutal, there's no lighting, you feel like you're in a coffin, essentially. You only see another human being when it's time for you to eat, right? It's pretty horrible, actually. So there must be efforts made, is what the Principles for Treatment of Prisoners, right, states, to abolish solitary confinement as a method of punishment. Okay, now conditions need to be created which enables prisoners, right, to undertake remunerated employment, right? So somebody like Sanjay Dutt in our country, he's doing carpentry work, for example, and he gets paid. I mean, that money is meaningless for Sanjay Dutt, but he gets to learn a new craft while he's in prison, of course, right? He's somebody who's earned crores and crores of rupees, so he doesn't really need the money. But there are other prisoners who could use that money. So you get remunerated employment, which will facilitate their reintegration into the country's labor market. That money will be given to them when they go into society, right, and permit them to contribute to their own financial support and to that of their families, right? Why are criminals there, in the first place? It's again all economics, right? Unless it's a crime of passion, as they say, right? Where in the heat of the moment you've committed a crime. Most offenses are motivated by money. It's as simple as that. Right? So what do these basic principles say? They also say prisoners shall have access to health services, available in the country without discrimination on the grounds of their legal situation. Right? Prisoners, with the participation and help of the community and social institutions, right, conditions should be created for the reintegration into society under the best possible conditions. So you have a lot of NGOs doing some amazing work in this country, where they go interact with prisoners and sort of prepare them for rehabilitation, right? Prepare them for their re-entry into society. It's very difficult to become a functioning member of society where essentially you have been confined like a child and your meals have been brought to you, etc., right? When you have to go fend for yourself. Of course, in prison you fend for yourself, but in the real world, it's so much more difficult. In prison, it's about your physical safety. You're often fending for yourself against fellow prisoners, maybe sometimes an overzealous jail staff. But in the real world, you need to put food on the table. Most of these prisoners would have had financial obligations in the first place, and those obligations don't go anywhere, right, when they are released. Okay, so in 2004, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights published a Human Rights in Prisons, a manual, right? A manual on human rights training for prison officials, right? Essentially. So we also need to educate prison officials. That has been the approach of the UN. It's also been the approach of most democratic civilized countries, right? Manual consists of in-depth information on sources and rights that prisoners have, right? There's also a pocketbook on the manual that you give to various prison officials. The pocketbook, right, introduces them to the human rights jurisprudence, essentially the rights of prisoners, right? And it also tells them, right, okay, you are as a prisoner, you as a prison official, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, basically. Okay, here you're looking at an artifact of the human rights manual. Okay, now, what are some of these principles contained in the manual? Okay, right to physical and moral integrity, right? All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, right? Human rights derive that from their inherent, the fact that they are a human being, essentially, right? You're born with certain unalienable rights, as the US Constitution puts it, right? And as a prisoner, those rights do not get alienated. You still possess those rights, right? All persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated at all times with humanity, is what the principles say, and with respect for the inherent dignity of the human person, right? They also say no one shall be subject to torture, cruel or inhuman or degrading treatment. There are no exceptions. That's very important. Human Rights Manual, published by the UN Human Rights Commissioner, right, basically says no exceptions to the cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. Okay, absolute rule, right? No torture. We'll come to this in later modules, right? Torture, which is defined as an act by which severe physical or mental pain or suffering is intentionally inflicted on a person, right? Unless, other than that which is inherent or incidental to lawful sanctions. So no torture, basically. Okay, no waterboarding and things like that. Okay. So, Any act of torture is committed part of a widespread or systematic attack against a civilian population is a crime against humanity, right? So even if you do it against a civilian population, right, it's not permissible, let alone prisoners. No prisoner shall be subjected, even with his or her consent, to any medical or scientific experimentation which may be detrimental to health, right? You had all of this happening in Hitler's Germany, Nazi Germany, right? So no prisoner can be a guinea pig, basically. You cannot experiment on him, okay, right? And all law enforcement officials should be fully informed and educated about the prohibition of torture and ill treatment, right? And any statement made as a result of torture, right, again, shall not be invoked as evidence in any proceedings, okay, right? So orders from a superior officer may not be invoked as a justification of torture, right? This is interesting. You have the film The Green Mile. You might have seen this American film starring Tom Hanks, right? You've seen so many shows where essentially, a lot of guards would say they were under direct orders. And also there's a film starring Kate Winslet called The Reader. It's a true story in Auschwitz, basically, right? Auschwitz was a concentration camp. Where a lot of Jews lost their life, and a lot of these Nazi guards tried to take cover or umbrage under the sort of justification saying, that, you know what, we had orders from a superior officer, and the Human Rights Manual says, no, I'm sorry, orders do not justify human rights violations, you must quit your job. I mean, is that possible in reality? Perhaps it is, perhaps it's not. I mean, then you also have another wonderful film that documents this camp, basically, in Burma, basically, right? They talk about this young Japanese officer who was essentially, this is another true story, there was this, the film is called The Railway Man, and essentially they have this Japanese officer who tortures these young British engineers, one in particular, and they actually met up later in life and they became excellent friends. And he told him initially that he was under direct orders from the Empire of Japan, right? So not to show any mercy, but for war criminals, that's not a defense. So essentially, if you're a prison official, you cannot take umbrage or you cannot take cover under the garb of saying, oh, that was an order from a superior officer, okay? So any prisoner who alleges that he or she has been subjected to torture has a right to complain, and the case must be heard promptly by the competent authorities. Custodial deaths also are dealt with. All interrogation rules, instructions, methods and practice pertaining to detainment and imprisoned persons shall be kept under systematic review, is what the principles say, essentially, right? A detailed register shall be kept for every person, right, deprived of their liberty. All prisoners should be provided promptly with written information about regulations which apply to them and their rights and obligations. This happens in most prisons. Even when you look at the execution of Yaqub Menon, there is a jail manual. We call it in India the jail manual. We will discuss the jail manual in detail in the next couple of modules, right? The families, legal representatives, and if appropriate, diplomatic missions of prisoners, and to receive full information, right? Diplomatic missions of prisoners are to receive full information about the fact of the detention and where they are held. All prisoners shall be offered a proper medical examination and treatment as soon as possible after admission. So as soon as you are taken into prison, you must have a full medical health check, right? Why is that? Because in case tomorrow, day after, that prisoner falls ill or suffers injuries, then somebody who's caused the injury, maybe a prison official, a fellow prisoner, cannot say, oh, you know what, no, this person already had it. It's basically, again, a safeguard against violence against prisoners, right? So the prisoners have a right to adequate standard of living. Yeah, they have an adequate standard of living. Many prisoners, in fact, go back to prison in many cases because at least there they get their food, they get their clothes, they get taken care of. And that is the sad state of affairs, not just in India, but also in countries like the United States, basically, which incarcerates the most number of people in the world in proportion to their population, right? The United States is, in fact, funnily known as the nation of incarceration, as they say, right? So, right, all people, right, again, we have to be treated with humanity, right? They have the right to an adequate standard of living, as you said, adequate food, clean drinking water, accommodation, clothing, and bedding, okay? Accommodation for prisoners shall provide adequate cubic content of air, even floor space, lighting, heating, even, and ventilation, okay? So, right, if you look at some of the standards in Tihar jail, it's terrible. I mean, right now you have Subrato Roy Sahara, who's lodged in Tihar jail. He has to make like 3 or 4 applications, and now he's been actually allocated quite a nice space, is what, if the news reports are to be believed. But atrocious conditions. You have 10 people, like 8 people. You have these kind of numbers in a small room, right? That's 10 by 6, 10 by 8, and you wonder how do they sort of fit in there. And you know, it's the conditions in India's prisons, especially right now, are pretty appalling, really. And so you need adequate food and drinking water, space to sleep, bedding. A lot of prisoners in India just sleep on the floor. Luckily they'll get a mat basically, but bedding is again a huge luxury. Sometimes they'll get a mattress and they'll just sleep on the mattress as well, right? Now, and prisoners shall be provided with wholesome and adequate food at usual hours. All of this is a utopian dream in our country, right? Clothing, right, is also necessary basically. So all prisoners, right, are not allowed to wear their own clothing, shall be provided with suitable clothing. There shall be facilities for keeping clothing clean and in proper condition. All prisoners shall be provided with a separate bed and clean bedding, as I've said, with facilities for keeping bedding clean also. And there must be facilities to wash and dry clothing and the bedding as well regularly. So you see how detailed these principles on the treatment of prisoners are. Now we come to health rights of prisoners. Okay, the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health is a human right. Right, it's a basic requirement that all prisoners should be given a medical examination, right, as soon as they've been admitted to prison or place of detention. Briefly alluded to this before. Now we'll go into it in further detail. Any necessary medical treatment should then be provided free of charge, right? Free of charge, right? So you had somebody like his name escapes me right now. Yeah, you had a Samajwadi Party leader, right, who was suffering from dialysis, and he was essentially given free treatment, right? Although obviously he was a very, very rich individual, but in prison he was given treatment for dialysis. There are prisoners who suffer from cancer. They essentially get shifted to the medical ward in the prison. So all of the prisons, the major prisons in India, have medical facilities, and if they don't have the adequate medical facilities to treat serious illnesses and simply have a dispensary, then you must move the prisoner basically, right? All of this contained in the jail manual. Prisoners and all detained persons have the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. As I've said, they must have free access to health services available in the country. Now, decisions about a prisoner's health should be taken only on medical grounds by medically qualified people. The jail superintendent has absolutely no say on whether a particular individual should be given chemotherapy or dialysis, right? The call has to be made by the jail superintendent. Okay, the medical officer has an important responsibility to ensure that proper health standards are met. He or she can do this by regularly inspecting and advising the director of the prison on the suitability of food, water, hygiene, cleanliness, sanitation, heating, lighting, ventilation, clothing, bedding, and the opportunities even for exercise. An exercise yard is so important because these people are confined in a cell all day. They need to stretch their legs essentially. It's good for the mind as well, right? So, and they need to get some maybe outdoor spaces with some sunshine, really, is what they need, right? Every prison should have proper health facilities. The medical staff have to provide a range of health needs, right? Dental, psychiatric care. So you have psychiatrists essentially, right? A lot of these prisoners are probably suffering from depression, mental illnesses, so psychiatrists should be provided to them. Sick prisoners who cannot be treated in the prison, such as prisoners with mental illness, should be transferred to a civilian hospital or to a specialized prison hospital. Sometimes if you plead insanity, they will recommend a course of treatment. They will in fact ask you, they will institutionalize you, but there may be situations where you essentially lose your sanity while you're in prison after your sentence has been given. In such a scenario, you must be shifted to a facility where you get adequate access to mental health care basically. Okay, right? Qualified dental practitioner too, right? Then you have psychiatric diagnosis, as I've said, right? Then prisoners who are insane shall not be detained in prisons, as I've just said, but be transferred to mental institutions. Prisoners suffering from other mental diseases shall be treated in specialized institutions under medical management. So see how detailed, and look at the principles. For example, most ordinary citizens in our country don't get this much of care, whereas in the United Nations, the Human Rights Manual on prisons essentially, right, aims to sort of, right, essentially say that whether you're a free man or a prisoner, you must be entitled to see these basic requirements. Okay, right? And you need to be supervised by a medical officer, especially if in your stay during prison you're insane or mentally ill. A medical officer must supervise you and must look after you basically, right? Healthcare for prisoners, right, it must be provided by at least one qualified medical officer. Each prison must have one qualified medical officer. Okay, and medical personnel have a duty to provide prisoners and detainees with healthcare equal to that which is afforded to those who are not imprisoned or detained. Like I said, you cannot make a distinction and say, oh, these are prisoners, we don't have to give them the quality of healthcare we give ordinary ordinary citizens, right? Primary responsibility, protect the health of all prisoners, and the healthcare personnel shall not commit or give their permission for any acts which may adversely affect the health of prisoners. They cannot be a mere rubber stamp for the jail authorities. So another requirement is all prisoners shall have at least 1 hour's daily exercise in the open air if the weather permits, basically, right? So that's another important element. Now, the next real concern is whether prisons are a safe space, right? Essentially, the manual says that prisons to be a safe place, right? Use of force, including use of firearms to prevent escape, should only be applied with less extreme means are insufficient, right? So you don't have to shoot somebody, right? Or if you can just send 5 guards to the other end of the prison wall, if he's climbing the wall, that's sufficient. Please don't shoot them down. Please don't even shoot them in the foot or something like that. Don't set dogs on them or something like that, okay? Because that's an extreme method, right? Extreme means, right? When less extreme means are available, you must use them, okay, basically. Prison should be a safe environment for all those who live and work in them. In other words, for prisoners and staff and for visitors too, right? So it's important that it's a safe place for visitors too. You have a lot of visitors coming there to see their loved ones who are incarcerated, right? But you have to protect them as well. It has to be a safe space. They cannot be intimidated, okay? No one in a prison should fear for his or her safety, right? Chains and irons shall not be used as restraints, okay? So in certain scenarios, you do have in Indian prisons chains still being used and irons still being used, all right, but their use is slowly and gradually being phased out, which is a very welcome development, basically, okay. Discipline and order shall be maintained with firmness, but with no more restriction than is necessary for safe custody and well-ordered community life. You must instill discipline, of course, you have to, right? You have to. You have a bunch of people who have committed, in most cases, violent crimes, right? So you have to instill discipline, but you don't have to instill fear. Instilling fear and instilling discipline are two very different things. All disciplinary offences and punishments must be specified by law or published legal regulations. So like in India, the jail manual, you cannot exceed anything that is not given the sanction of law, okay. No prisoner should be punished before being informed of the alleged offence and had the opportunity to prepare a proper defence, and no prisoner shall be employed in any disciplinary capacity. No prisoner should be employed in any disciplinary capacity. You cannot give one prisoner, right, a position of power over other prisoners, because that is a recipe for disaster, basically. You must treat them as equals, essentially, okay. Punishment by close confinement or reduction of diet shall never be inflicted. You must always give them food, right, essentially. But if the prisoner is certified as medically unfit to sustain the food, in that scenario, that's permissible, okay, right? And of course, if you've subjected them to disciplinary action, they must have the right to appeal the findings of the disciplinary authority. And what about contact with the outside world? Well, the principles say no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his or her privacy, family, home or correspondence. All prisoners shall have the right to communicate with the outside world, especially with their families, okay, right? Now, foreign prisoners shall be allowed to communicate with their diplomatic representatives, right? A prisoner's request to be held in a prison near his friend, near his home, shall be granted as far as possible. Okay, so if you say, please house me near my family, it will be granted, right? But say Sanjay Dutt, he's been housed in Pune's Yerawada jail, right? That's in Pune, he lives in Bombay, but it's not possible, right? So there is Arthur Road jail also, but you know, they've housed him in Pune, in Yerawada, okay? Now, prisoners shall be kept informed of important items of news even, right? So you have to tell them about the outside world, right? Some prisons now you have television, right? For example, of course, the VIPs all get their own private television, but ordinary prisoners also, they should have access to news items, right? They need to keep abreast of developments. And you say, why the latest developments? Why do they need to keep abreast? Well, you are hoping that they will re-enter society as productive members. They need to know what's going on in society, right? So essentially, look, all these principles are alluding to the fact that, okay, yes, somebody has committed an offense, a crime. Yes, they've been punished, okay, but you know, that doesn't mean that's it, they give up. Like, you know, now any debate about any event that Salman Khan makes a comment about, people say, oh, you're convicted, you as a convict, you have no rights. So that's not true, right? As a convict, you continue to have those rights under the principles of the, under human rights conventions in the United Nations and human rights principles, and you have the right to, freedom of expression, freedom of speech as well. Okay, now we finally come to complaints and inspection procedures, right? All prisoners, right, whose rights have been violated or they claim that they've been violated, you must give them an effective remedy. There must be a dispute redressal mechanism, right? Every prisoner should have the right to make a complaint regarding his or her treatment, and unless the complaint is evidently frivolous, to have it dealt with promptly and if requested confidentially. Okay, so various principles with regard to complaints and inspection procedures, right? And if a complaint is rejected or not responded to in a timely manner, the complainant shall be entitled to bring it before a judicial or other authority. So you essentially have various appeals that are filed by people in jail, right? But I'm also talking about disciplinary proceedings in jail, right? You also have the authority to approach the courts, essentially. The states need to ensure prompt and impartial investigation, right? There should be thorough, right, and all suspected cases of extra-legal, arbitrary and summary execution, including cases where complaints by relatives or other reliable reports suggest unnatural death in the above circumstances, right? You had this instance of Ram Yadav, I think that was his name, one of the convicts in the Nirbhaya case, basically, who hanged himself, right? But the circumstances of his death, many people believe, was very suspicious. He was found hanging from pretty high ceiling, and many people wondered how he could have hung himself from such a high ceiling. Theories doing the rounds that he was murdered by fellow inmates. We don't know, right? It's all conjecture. So there needs to be a proper, impartial inquiry, right? And especially people like rapists, convicted child molesters, like pedophiles. The prisons are not a safe place for them, right? Now you would say, why does a rapist need a safe space? Should a rapist should prison be a safe space, a safe place for a rapist and a molester or pedophile? Well, the answer is yes. That's how human rights jurisprudence is it's moving towards today. Because you see, at the end of the day, you've already punished them. You've already deprived them of their liberty. And if you're looking at a reformative system, right, the least you can do is make it a safe place. If they're continuously harassed and persecuted by their fellow inmates, where is the reformation going to happen? You could have a situation like this Ram Yadav fellow. They could kill themselves, irrespective of whether he actually killed himself or not. And there was no real outrage. There was no real public outrage when he was found dead in prison, right? That outrage should be there. In a democratic, civilized society, every death, every unnatural death, every taking of a life, right, there must be outrage, right? Otherwise, it just smacks of double standards, basically, right? And these principles give effect to this line of thought. Okay. Now, prisons also need to be inspected, right? Qualified and experienced inspectors from a competent authority separate from the prison administration. You can't just have the DG prisons basically coming and inspecting the prison, right? There must be a special independent authority, preferably independent, at least if not independent, completely independent, competent enough, right? And impartial more than anything like that, okay? More than anything else. Every prisoner shall have the right to communicate freely and confidentially with these inspectors, right? So when these inspectors come, right, these prisoners should be allowed to voice their grievances to them. Does it actually happen in practice? As a prisoner, you probably don't want to do it. If you get your jailer in trouble, if you get the prison staff in trouble, you probably don't want to do it. So, they essentially, you have to evolve a mechanism where there is an element of confidentiality, right? But what happens in prisons if there is a complaint, all prisoners suffer. So, in reality, in practice, it's very rare for these prisoners to actually complain, right? And in India, like in the world, there are special categories of prisoners. Women, for example, right? Women are entitled to equal enjoyment and protection of all human rights in political, economic, social, cultural, civil, and all other fields, right? So female prisoners shall not suffer discrimination and shall be protected from violence or exploitation, okay, right? Women prisoners should be detained separately from male prisoners. In India, that's always the case, right? You have separate prisons for women. Women prisoners shall be supervised and searched only by female officers and staff. Pregnant women also have certain special rights. You must give them special facilities, right, that they need for giving birth, and also for ensuring that the health of the baby does not suffer. You have the famous case of Nalini, one of the conspirators in the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case. She actually gave birth in prison, and she was in fact visited in a great gesture by Rajiv Gandhi's daughter Priyanka Gandhi, right? And Nalini had a child. That child has grown up, essentially, right? And she's able to communicate with that child. She's able to see that child. It really shows the humane nature, the humane side of the Indian state in many ways, right? And wherever practicable, women prisoners should be taken, right, to hospitals to give birth. Essentially, try not, it's better if they don't give birth in the prison, but Nalini did, right? You have also juveniles, or a special category of prisoners, right? You have basically bostels, right? You have you have remand homes in India, right? There was a lot of outrage when one of the individuals who raped Nirbhaya was a juvenile, right? He was in a remand home. He'll soon be released, right? A lot of people who have had a chance to observe this juvenile, whose name cannot be disclosed for legal reasons, have stated that he's doing very well. They feel he is on the path of reformation. He's cooking, he's drawing, maybe it's all a facade, we don't know, but at least, you know, the Indian state will not execute a juvenile, and the principles, all international law, you know, principles, the human rights manual that we're dealing with here also states that, you know, children who are detained shall be treated in a manner which promotes their sense of dignity and worth, facilitates their reintegration into society, reflects their best interests, and takes their need into account. Right? Essentially, this juvenile, he's he's less than 18 years old. We hope that he gets a second chance at society, a second chance at life. Does he deserve a second chance? Well, the Indian state has determined that he does deserve a second chance, and you know who staffs the Indian state? They're the elected representatives, right? So essentially, we the people of India have decided that juveniles should not be essentially treated as or tried as adults in many cases, and that sort of extends to the rights that juveniles have as prisoners. Essentially, no corporal punishment, capital punishment, or life imprisonment for juveniles, basically. Okay, now privacy of these children shall be respected. As I said, name should not be disclosed because it can essentially ruin the rest of their life, right? And essentially special efforts must be made for them to correspond and sort of communicate with their family, right? Now, juveniles of compulsory school age should be educated and given vocational training. This happens very often, okay, in remand homes in India. Okay, weapons of course shall not be carried, right, in institutions which hold juveniles, right? A remand home, right? You had this case in Uttar Pradesh where you had 60 juveniles escape, basically, right? No weapons, basically, right? I mean, sometimes that could be flaunted, but at least, you know, in India, we try and follow to a large extent international standards when it comes to juveniles, okay? And also parents of the juveniles that we notified essentially of anything to do with the juvenile, any admission, transfer, release, sickness, injury, or even the death of a juvenile in certain unfortunate cases. And of course, right, the most cardinal principle is non-discrimination. All persons, all prisoners even are equal before the law, and they must be entitled to equal protection of the law, basically. Okay, and similarly, prisoners who are foreign nationals shall be allowed reasonable facilities to communicate with diplomatic representatives, and prisoners who are nationals of states without diplomatic representation in the country shall be allowed reasonable facilities to communicate with the diplomatic representative of the state which takes charge of their interests, right? And there are also persons under detention without sentence. We call them under trials in India. The situation of under trials in India is quite appalling. You have under trials, you know, you had the case in Bihar of a woman who was in prison for 17 years, essentially because she could not get pay bail. Her trial for murder had still not taken place. Her son, who essentially saw her go to prison when he was 2 or 3 years old, essentially had to get a job and actually bail her out. And the sum was ridiculous, something as low as 2,000 rupees, and she just rotted in prison. And you know, that's a travesty of justice if there ever is one, right? So anyone who is arrested, right, at the time of the arrest will be informed of their rights. We've done this, rights of arrested person, right? And once they're under trial, right, essentially the trial should be expedited and should take place as quickly as possible, right? So, you know, all these other rights with regard to arrested persons are contained in the slides, and you can actually contained in the slides and in the e-text, and you can actually go through them. Okay, so finally coming to the summary, the international law, right, international law over the years has developed a complex jurisprudence with regard to rights of prisoners. It's constantly evolving, right? The standards, the human rights have constantly evolving. We also need to evolve as a society, right? And essentially marginalized and outcast and essentially impoverished members of society, right, are given sort of special protections, right, under human rights principles and human rights jurisprudence. Several conventions have various clauses to ensure that the human rights of convicted offenders are not violated. And in this module, we've essentially brought out some of those principles that are enumerated and enunciated in these international instruments.